Can you sing, Master Hobbit?
Yes. At least, well enough for my own people.
Come, sing me a song.
Today we are ranking 60 death metal albums from the year 2003, and we're going to get right into it with Spawn of Possession with Cabinet. Top-notch technical death metal debut, hitting the ground running. Swarm the Formless comes in so hard, leaving the listener in a smoldering crater for the remainder of the album, and then Hidden in Flesh follows it up in absolutely dizzying fashion. Personally, I think like every track on here is a 10, but personal favorites include Dirty Priest, Spawn of Possession, and Cabinet. Clear influence on Archspire with some of these rapid-fire vocals, too. I am putting this at perfection. Next up is Nunslaughter with Goat. The sophomore effort from this blackened and thrash-infused Pennsylvania band, keeping things pretty simple and raw, but to a fault. The songs range from bland to kind of cringe at times, and the performances fail to really get me going, even in spite of my beloved D-beats that show up quite a bit on here, so this one is going to okay. Then we have Aborted with Goremageddon. The Belgian band taking a significant step forwards in the instrumentation on this one, and with Dirk of Soilwork and Mortuary killing it on session drums. Really loving the melodeathy riffs on Charted Carnal Effigy, hinting towards their sound to come. Great solos, Sven starting to come into his own, and pretty sick cover of Carcass's Carnal Forge too, that knocked me on my ass. Easily my favorite of their earlier works. It is going to amazing. Next up is Drawn and Quartered with Extermination Revelry. Now, I've enjoyed a few albums from the Seattle band, but this sophomore effort is a little bit hit and miss for me, definitely bringing the heaviness as well as some nice earworm leads to add to the ominous atmosphere. But the songwriting is often clunky and repetitive, the vocals kind of monotonous, and the production generally kind of unpleasant, but still enjoyable enough. It went to great tier. Next up, we have Hour of Penance with Disturbance. This is the debut album from this Italian tech death band that I recently covered with their latest album, Devotion. I wasn't sure about this one going in, but I already found it growing on me the deeper I got into it. I dig the slimy groove of From Hate to Suffering, and pretty infectious Inhaling Disbelief. Nema and Soul Addicted also have some pretty killer riffing, and the drumming is insane across the board. This one is going to killer. We have Zyklon with Aeon. The second album from this Norwegian blackened death metal project, not to be confused with Zyklon B, despite sharing Emperor's Samoth as a member. Very heavy, pissed off sounding stuff, kind of Domination era Morbid Angel meets Demigod era Behemoth. I saw some reviewers score this quite low, often citing the change in vocalist from the previous album, but I don't know, I thought this was pretty rad. It went all the way to fantastic for me. Next up is Inveracity with Cycle of Perversion. The first of only two full-length albums from this Greek technical brutal death metal band, definitely hearing comparisons to Dying Fetus, Deeds of Flesh, and Early Suffocation, but not quite as engaging as any of those. Still, I bang my head quite a bit to that pingy snare drum, the sudden pace changes are fun, and at about 28 minutes it doesn't overstay its welcome. It is going to good tier. Next up, we have Kalmah with Swampsong. Legendary album and a fan favorite for sure for this Finnish melodeath band. So many killer tracks on here. Heroes to Us opens the album on a seriously triumphant note. Vervat's Revenge and Cloned Insanity have some killer great dueling leads, and the third, Magical, is one of their most grandiose arena-worthy arrangements to date, with Doubtful above it all not far behind. I think this takes everything that was great about the first two albums and perfects the formula. It is going to perfection. Next up is Mortician with Darkest Day of Horror. Technically, this was originally released in September 2002 under Mortician's label, but it received a wider release via Relapse in April of 2003. More grimy, brutal vocals, horror movie samples, and programmed drums from this New York crew. All perfectly fine stuff, but once more, I don't especially connect with their appeal. It also starts to get monotonous after a few songs, but there are a few slappers like Rampage. I put this one at good tier. We have Portal with Seepia. love this Australian band, and they are one of the rare ones that mostly had their very specific sound right out of the gate, despite how unlike anything else it was. They've already got that like swarming insect sound going on, though the production is definitely more raw, which I have mixed feelings about. Tempest Fugit and Sunken may be my personal favorites on this one. It went to amazing. Next up is Skyfire with Mind Revolution. Album 2 from this Swedish melodeath band, kind of mixing elements of both Swedish and Finnish style. Another one where the vocals and production could use a little work, but plenty to enjoy here regardless. It went to great tier. We have Psycroptic with the Scepter of the Ancients. Album 2 from this techie Australian crew, and it feels like a significant step up from the debut. The production still leaves something to be desired, and it stumbles here and there, but the riffs are excellent and the pacing is quite fun. I also appreciate the vocal variation and general interplay of all the members. This one to killer. Then we have Corpsefucking Art with Splatter Deluxe. Sadly, yes, there will be some censorship in this video. I'd prefer not to, but these types of videos take way too much time and effort for me to risk them being demonetized. If you'd like to help me get to a point where I don't have to worry about that, then you can join the Patreon or become a channel member. Regardless, this is the debut album from this Italian slamming brutal death metal band. This was another one that didn't do a whole lot for me in comparison to something like Mutilated, which we'll talk about, but I found myself spacing out and basically dissociating a lot of the time. Pretty monotonous stuff that just turns into a drone. I see some people love this, and more power to you, but there are just only a few moments I really enjoyed, like Dawson's Crypt. That one gave me a little chuckle too, but yeah, just went to okay. Then there's Before the Dawn with My Darkness. The debut album from this Finnish melodeath band, fronted by Tuomas Saukkonen of Wolfheart. Pretty strong, if sometimes slightly clunky stuff with a similar emphasis on mournful atmosphere as both that and Insomnium. Really dig the hypnotic swing of the music and shimmery synth additions. The clean vocal moments aren't as strong, but still work well enough and give a nice ebb and flow to the overall pacing. I put this at great tier. Next up is Kronos with Colossal Titan Strife. Album number 2 for this French brutal death metal band, and love the sheer speed and intensity of the instrumentation, but I really just personally don't care much for these vocals. It's very one note and gets kind of grating. I see some people really seem to love this album, and more power to you again if you're one of them. Share why in the comments, but for me, this actually got annoying pretty fast. The guitar work is solid enough, but yeah, this just went to okay for me. Ooh, then we have Septicflesh with Sumerian Demons. Now for me, this is where this Greek band truly comes into their own. Just so many incredible moments on this album. The amazing opener and Unbeliever, love the gothic and moody Dark River, epic title track, super memorable hook on The Watchers. Really stepping up and tightening up the songwriting. It's not as symphonic as the albums to come after this, but it's still among my favorites, and so it is going to perfection. Then there's Vital Remains with Dechristianize. My personal favorite album from this Rhode Island band, where each album sounds just a little different in part due to the varying lineup. Glenn Benton of Deicide on vocals, and he sounds great. Killer mix of traditional death metal with some more melodic flourishes and those truly triumphant harmonized guitar leads. Infidel, Unleashed Hell, and At War with God are particular standouts, but I'd say this is a really great listen start to finish. Even if it's a bit overlong at an hour, I'd put it at fantastic. Next up is Deeds of Flesh with Reduced to Ashes. Album 5 for this California brutal tech crew, and personally I feel like it's kind of diminishing returns at this point, but then again this might be one that grows on me in the future. The vocals are pretty dull, but the riffs are solid if lacking some more memorable qualities. I do like Disinterred Arcade Heap. Quite a few high scores on Metal Archives, including 3 100%, but personally I'd put it at like good tier. Then we have Ghoul with Maniacs. The California band continuing their fun fusion of death, thrash, and horror themes on their second album. Pretty consistent headbanging inducing stuff, fun riffs, infectious rhythms, and great snarling vocals over a tight 34-minute runtime. Just a blast of a record. Like, I could re-listen to this one over and over again. Went to amazing. Then there's Rune Magic with Darkness, Death, Doom. Big surprise that an album with this name doesn't do a whole lot for me, again with this Swedish band. Good groove and some earworm leads, solid production too, but it's just not really my thing. And again, like, you can put down in the comments where do you agree, where do you disagree. There's going to be a lot of subjectivity going into 60 albums. We're not going to agree on anything, and it would be really boring if we did. But yeah, anyways, this is going to okay. And we have Dark Lunacy with Forget Me Not. The sophomore album from this Italian symphonic death metal band with very classy use of strings mixed with a lot of Gothenburg melodeath sentiment. Love the violin and general sense of emotion that comes through, but the guitar work feels like it clashes at times and the production could do a better job of balancing things out. It just feels like they were on the verge of a higher pick here, but the execution is a little hit and miss for me and can be overly long-winded, so kind of split the difference and put them at killer. Then there's Edge of Sanity with Crimson 2. The final album from the Swedish prog death band, though this brief revival is actually just Dan Sueno returning with the help of session musicians. Regardless, it seems clear that Dan had a lot to say, as right from the top with the Forbidden Words, he is bringing his A-game with insanely catchy just everything. And really, the entire runtime is extremely engaging and rewarding, showcasing a wide variety of styles from Opeth to In Flames to even like Dream Theater. I put this at perfection. Next up is Misery Index with Retaliate. This Baltimore band debuting with just really bloody, intense music, raw production, and plenty of blast beats just going straight for the throat. No frills, just pure aggression with some of their hardcore influences showing from the very beginning, like the D-beat sections on The Great Depression or the gang vocals on Demand the Impossible. Nothing mind-blowing, but at just over 30 minutes, there's very little fat on the bone, and the drumming is just pulverizing. This one went to amazing. Next up is Gore Rotted with Only Tools and Corpses. This UK band combines elements of death metal and grindcore on this second album. It's definitely aggressive and has some gut-punching transitions, but I also find the songwriting and use of grindcore vocals annoyingly repetitious at times. Not necessarily a bottom pick, though, as there is still plenty that I enjoyed. It is going to good tier. Next up is Intestine Ballism with Banquet in the Darkness. I already deeply enjoyed this Japanese band's debut, but I think that they only step things up on this one. Killer melodeath riffs with plenty of At the Gates vibes on the likes of Banquet in the Darkness, and the solo on A Curse of Baal is just spellbinding. The only thing that prevents this from hitting perfection tier for me are the vocals, which are fine but lack the dynamics and more engaging qualities of the rest of the music. Maybe that'll change over time, but for now, they went to fantastic. And we have Children of Bodom with Hate Crew Death Roll. I've been very vocal in multiple videos at this point that this is one of my personal favorites, Children of Bodom albums. This is where they take all the elements they've been working on and pretty much perfect them. The hooks are even stronger, the vocals more anthemic, and the solos as insane as ever. Needled 24/7, 6-pounder, Bodom Beach Terror, the title track. Also the last album to be recorded with all 5 original members. This one has to go to perfection. And we have Wormed with Planispherium. So I love this band based out of Spain, but full disclosure, I did not even realize that their albums went back this far. I always assumed they were more of a 2010s band since that's when their name took off a bit more. Regardless, I have such a 50-50 opinion of this album. On the one hand, kudos to them for, again, just hitting the ground running with all the elements we associate with them today, from the insane technicality to the croaky, toad-like vocals. But on the other hand, the production is pretty awful, which makes it much harder to fully appreciate everything that's going on and develop the larger sci-fi atmosphere that the later albums have. Again, gonna split the difference here, but a remaster or re-recording could easily make this a top tier album. For now, it is going to great tier. Next up is Belphegor with Lucifer Incestus. Most simply summarized as horny devil music. There is a lot I don't like from this black and death metal band, but this is one I do enjoy quite a bit for its pretty infectious debauchery. Lots of great black metal riffing, atmosphere, and blast beats on the likes of that one track that I'm probably just not even going to pronounce correctly, Paradise Regained, and the title track. Delightfully devilish listen, and I'd say it's one of their best, easily. It's going to amazing. Next up is The Crown with Possessed 13. Album 6 from this Swedish band, and with each one, I just wish these guys would get some more help with production, because man, they have still yet to put out one that I really think sounded great. It's not the good kind of raw and ugly, it just feels sort of flat and blown out, which is a shame because it ends up making it harder to enjoy the pretty strong performances that come up. It's hit and miss, but tracks like Deliverance, Kill 'Em All, and Not As Head Overdrive would hit so much harder with a production job more like The Haunted, which we'll get to them, but this one is going to good tier. Then we have Cerebral Effusion with Violence in Motion. Another brutal death metal debut, this one out of Spain. More perfectly passable, but ultimately difficult to tell apart material from the waves of similar bands. They throw in some high vocals to offset the gutturals, but that's about it in the way of standing apart from others on this list. They just landed at okay. On the other hand, we have Mithras with Worlds Beyond the Veil. Much like with Goreguts, this UK band is one I deeply respect, but can only listen to when I'm absolutely in the mood. They frequently alternate haunting, blissful ambience only to further punctuate the truly apocalyptic nature of the heavier moments. Throw in comparisons to the likes of Sarpanitum, Lycathia Flame, and Blood Incantation for good measure. From the highly dense and dizzying technical performances to the production, this is spellbinding stuff and a big step up from the debut. It's just not something I can listen to all the time. It's kind of exhausting, frankly, but it's going to amazing. I think we're at the point too where I'm gonna have to make a little bit of space here. We'll just go by the colors. All right, next up we have Dying Fetus with Stop at Nothing. Everyone quit except for John Gallagher after Destroy the Opposition, so this is almost a completely new lineup, and you can definitely hear the difference in sound, but overall, I just dig how fast and aggressive this one is. I'd even argue it's one of the heaviest overall in their discography, and maybe of this entire year. Great opener with that insane noisy riff on Schematics, and then another great track in One Shot, One Kill. We've got Institutions of Deceit being a serious grinder. Onslaught of Malice has some serious foot-tapping D-beats. The thing blazes by in 35 minutes. This one also went to perfection. Then we have Luciferion with The Apostate. The second and final album from this Swedish crew with vocals from Dark Tranquillity bassist Michael Nicholson. The first 5 tracks are pretty awesome as they conceptually seem to center around the movie Dark City and even incorporate several clips from the film. Tons of great atmosphere amidst the heaviness. But the remaining tracks are clearly tacked on from completely different recording sessions with a Celtic Frost cover from 1996 and 5 more tracks recorded in 93 and 94. None of it is bad, they just don't really gel when thrown all together like this. Ultimately, I'm going to put them at great, but the first 5 tracks are closer to fantastic. Next up is Putrid Pile with Collection of Butchery. The debut album from this Wisconsin one-man brutal death metal project, credit at least for some vocal variety and fun D-beat sections. Also was not expecting to hear a Star Wars prequel sample about Anakin killing everyone, but still not giving me a whole lot to work with beyond the little laugh that gave me. It went to okay. Next up is Blood Red Throne with Affiliated with the Suffering. Album 2 from this Norwegian death metal band, still dropping solid albums today. Plenty of comparisons to Cannibal Corpse here, from the songwriting to the guitar tone to the gore elements. Really strong album, if a little derivative, but the execution is truly on point. They made it to killer for me. We also have Norther with Mirror of Madness. I've definitely gotten to the point where I can listen to a melodeath band and pretty much know within a few seconds if they are from Finland. Much like the Gothenburg style of Sweden, these guys have a trademark all their own, shared with everyone from Children of Bodom to Ensifirum. In any case, this is the band's second album, and it is jam-packed with galloping rhythm guitars, epic synths, and triumphant leads. My one mild criticism is that the vocals feel kind of simplistic and lacking again in comparison to the rest of the music, but they work just fine here. I also didn't find it to be like super memorable, but then again, I haven't listened listen to this album as much as some of my other favorites here, but landed at amazing. Then we have The Haunted with One Kill Wonder. The Swedish thrash and melodeath fusers' awesome follow-up to The Haunted Made Me Do It. Definitely feels like a part 2 in the same style, with the same focus on speed and hooks going kind of 70% at the gates, 30% Pantera. So many rippers: God Puppet, Shadow World, Bloodletting, and of course DOA. This one went to fantastic. I know some people argue whether or not they truly fit into death metal, but I think there's plenty of that like Gothenburg melodeath sound still woven in there. Next up is Asphyxiate with The Process of Mutilation. The debut album from this brutal death metal band from Indonesia. Personally, I'm not that into slam, and the edgy samples don't really do anything for me either. That said, I got just enough entertainment value out of the music and was never actually bored. I just feel no desire to really return to it, but landed a spot at good. Next up is Mutilated with Devirginated Genital Pulp. Gurgle City for this Michigan band's one and only album. Again, generally, I'm not as into some of the more brutal stuff in the genre, and once more, I could do without the incredibly edgy samples, but this one hits pretty damn well for me with its head bob-inducing grooves and battering snare drum. So yeah, it earned a spot at great tier in spite of all that. It's not that I don't like this style, I'm just very picky about which bands I think are really, like, worth listening to and repeating. Next up is Dimension Zero with This Is Hell. The second album from this band I overlooked on the previous year's video. Really aggressive take on melodeath here that reminds me a lot of early Soilwork. The drums are relentless and the riffs go super hard. Glad I checked this out, as it's another serious hidden gem. It went all the way to perfection. Went the distance. Alright, making a little bit more room here. Next up is Arch Enemy with Anthems of Rebellion. Another album I listened to a lot in high school, side by side with Wages of Sin from this Swedish melodeath band. More killer tracks like Silent Walls, making for another great opener. We Will Rise is an instant classic. Dead Eyes See No Future has a cool, more melodic edge to the guitars, and then that surprise string section later on is just amazing. End of the Line rips. The Meshuggah drumming on Dehumanization rules. One of my favorites from them. Could make a case for perfection. It's definitely my top 10 overall on this list, I would say. But I put it at fantastic. Then we have Extol with Synergy. An album I was on the fence about for this list, as it's less clear-cut death metal than Undeceived was. Definitely hear the implementation of metalcore and thrash among other things, but ultimately I kept feeling like this mostly kind of feels like an Opeth album that also has a taste for Voivod. Anyway you slice it though, these Norwegians love their prog and know how to craft an impressively layered and original album. I put this one at killer. Then there's Debodified with Utopia in the Eyes of a Beast. Another one-and-done band, this one splitting up apparently just 2 months after releasing this album. Frankly, I don't feel like much was lost. More dime a dozen Brie fests. Admittedly, the duo showcase both some solid skill in a technical level, but the songwriting just doesn't always do them enough favors to warrant digging into it. Some fun grooves here and there. Embolgen between crunches is pretty fun, but a lot of We Have Dying Fetus at Home kind of energy. But wasn't a bottom pick. It went to good tier. Then we have Mors Principium Est with Inhumanity. One of my favorite and highly underrated bands in melodeath. They are out of Finland, but never received the same name recognition of countrymen like Insomnium and Children of Bodom, but I think that they are just as good. Their debut is among my least favorite in their discography, but it's just such a strong discography that it still makes a high spot here with all the amazing hooks. Very much on par with the likes of In Flames, too. So, all the way to fantastic for this one. But then we have Morbid Angel with Heretic. Moving a bit into the twilight years of this once powerhouse of a death metal band, some highlights here. Carl Sanders of Nile plays a solo on God of Our Own Divinity, and Enshrined by Grace made it on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake soundtrack. God bless that era of metal movie soundtracks, by the way. I also kind of like Beneath the Hollow and Curse the Flesh. Stepping back to the raw production here, which unfortunately sounds very muddy and not pleasing to the ear, and the songwriting just isn't much better either. This landed at okay. I keep meaning to look up the band pronouncing their own name. Maybe I'll put in a clip here, but we have a Chrysian or Chrysian with Works of Carnage.
I am Alex from Chrysian.
Already on album 5 from this Brazilian band, and I feel like they have been growing a lot by this point in their career. Thorns of Heaven is a killer opener packed with great hooks and an explosive solo. And fortunately, this carries into the rest of the album with incredibly tight songs, often under 3 minutes for another lean and mean runtime of just 32. Incredible guitar work, easily my favorite from them so far by a mile. This was another one that just kind of came out and surprised me and made it to perfection tier. Next up is Gorgasm with Masticate to Dominate. This Illinois brutal death metal band followed up Bleeding Profusely from the 2001 list. I will say that this feels like a step up, but really for me, the best things about going through these types of releases is that they're all only around 30 minutes. Credit to this one for offering a bit more dynamics to make a slightly more engaging and interesting runtime, in addition to the more highly technical performances, so this one actually went to great tier. We also have Omnium Gatherum with Spirits in August Light. The debut album from this melodic death metal band that have been somewhat quietly putting out solid albums for 2 decades now. The riffs here are already strong, if falling just a little short of my top melodeath picks here in terms of overall songwriting, but it went to amazing. Then we have Waco Jesus with Filth. Only the edgiest of the edgy from this Eureka, Illinois brutal death metal crew's second album. From the album art to the song titles, this one just begs you to be shocked, but even the Metal Archives reviewers failed to show much interest at this one. I wouldn't care as much about the try-hardness of it if the music was even remotely remarkable, but it just really isn't. It's not the absolute worst thing here either. Love the papyrus font too, by the way. It is going to good tier. And we have Carnal Forge with The More You Suffer. Album 4 for this Swedish band, also in a similar style to The Haunted, kind of leaning more into groove metal than death metal, but still retaining a lot of the Gothenburg melodeath hallmarks. Saw a lot of hate for this one on Metal Archives reviews, but I love this sound, so very much appealing to me. Awesome riffs and solos abound, and the drumming has that kinetic energy, again recalling early Soilwork. This one makes it too fantastic for me. Next up is Necronomicon with The Sacred Medicines. The second album from this Canadian band, and despite it being the best reviewed on Metal Archives, I wasn't a big fan of this one alternatively. It has its moments, but it's so stripped back and simplistic in a way that I think only further highlights its faults. I don't like the sloppy, bluesy solos or guitar tone in general, and it just feels like a slog, aside from the parts with the Native American elements. Those are pretty cool, but yeah, for me, this just went to okay. Then we have Ackercock with Koronson. Almost left these guys out again, as the lists I pull from continue to overlook them. About as experimental as you can get alongside Mithras, though these guys always win on that front, between sheer weirdness and breadth of scope that largely transcends genre. That said, it's another one I feel like I respect more than I actually consistently enjoy in actual execution. Just want to killer. Then there's Decrepit Birth with And Time Begins. Another US debut, this one from California, and arguably one of the bigger names in tech here. Unfortunately, this has not some of their best work, I would say. It's still better than some here. Incredible drumming, for sure. Just wish the songs were a little bit more interesting and memorable. I put this one at good tier. We have Bloodstained Child with Mystic Your Heart. Another Japanese melodeath band I was not previously aware of with their second album. These guys taking more influence from the Finnish scene, particularly Children of Bodom with the flashy synths. Really fun stuff, brimming with energy, though the production could be a little better, and a few times the clean singing pops up. I really wish they just wouldn't bother, as on the title track, but this one also went to Killer. Then we have Gojira with The Link. The sophomore effort from this now massively well-known French band. Nowadays, I'd characterize them more as progressive and groove metal, but in the early days, there was still more than enough death metal to qualify, and y'all voted to keep them on here. But I also hear them really coming into their own sound right off the bat with the title track and Death of Me. Plenty of clear Meshuggah influences, but they put their own unique spin on it, and I dig the often more tribal sound to the drums, sort of Meshuggah meets Soulfly in a way. The songwriting isn't as smooth and free-flowing as it was become on Mars to Sirius, but I find myself enjoying this one more and more with each listen. It went to fantastic. Then we have Goat Whore with Funeral Dirge for the Rotting Sun. The second album from this New Orleans black and death metal band, heavy emphasis on the black metal, filthy, grimy sounding stuff that could easily have come from Norway in the 90s, but they put their own sludgy spin on it. I enjoy it, but I don't necessarily love it, so it went to great tier. Next up is Night Rage with Sweet Vengeance. More underrated At the Gates inspired Swedish melodeath, brimming with crunchy hooks and harmonized lead guitars. There are some moments of corny clean singing that I could definitely do without, but thankfully they are brief. Another really strong debut in a year just packed with them. This one went to amazing. Then there's Soilwork with Figure Number 5. Great album from the Swedish band's more melodic era, and one of my personal favorites, even if it's barely melodic death metal. Like, it's definitely questionable to include them on this list, which is why I'm bumping them down quite a bit. But it starts off strong with the extremely infectious Rejection roll and never lets up from there with other standouts like Overload, Figure Number 5, Light the Torch, and Departure Plan. If it was just sheer enjoyment, I would put this, like, at fantastic or perfection, but again, I recognize that it's not really a death metal album, so I bumped it down to killer. Oh, but then we have 6 Feet Under with Bringer of Blood. The album cover I most closely associate with this band as I think it perfectly fits their goober sound. Sick in the Head is like a child thinking they're clever, replacing the lyrics to their high school spirit chant. America the Brutal is another especially bad performance, but on the flip side, Murdered in the Basement is kind of amusing. It is definitely not good, and yet somehow it made Billboard Heatseekers number 22 for 2 weeks, which makes me sad because it is easily the worst thing here, and you know what? I can't even in good conscience. I think I put some of the previous albums at okay tier because they're like, I can handle them, I guess, but I think this requires its own category at this point. Like, we're gonna add one, and say it with me, gang. You know what it's gonna be. You know what the category has to be. This is going to Before I get to my final pick, just a reminder to comment down below, where do you agree, where do you disagree? Hit the like button if you're enjoying it, hit the dislike if you hate it, and also if you're really enjoying the video, I put out videos like this like twice a week generally throughout the year, and also of other cool top 15, top 20 lists, things like that, so consider subscribing. But honorable mentions here, Strapping Young Lad with the self-titled, another one where I polled the audience, like, is this actually death metal? Because it did show up on the list, but we were in kind of agreement that it's sort of its own thing. It's like industrial, groove, progressive, some death metal in there, but yeah, didn't really fit the list, although arguably if I put Soilwork on here, some may argue differently, but hey, my list, my rules. We also have Opeth with Damnation. Obviously, very important death metal band, but there is zero death metal on that album. It is almost purely acoustic, and people really enjoy it, but doesn't fit on this list. But moving to the final album we're going to talk about today, we have the Black Dahlia Murder with Unhallowed. Trevor, again, rest his soul, listed this album as his number one, even after all these years. It is just such a great debut, even in spite of some of its shortcomings, and maybe because of them in some ways. Every song is a killer, but personal favorites for me include Funeral Thirst, Elder Misanthropy, and Closed Casket Requiem. I loved this album when it dropped, and I still love it to this day. I've listened to it countless times. It's obvious to me why it's still one that is talked about with so much love. It is going to perfection. And just to give you a quick look at the entire list, and you can find this on tiermaker.com, patreon.com as well if you want to do your own ranking. Y'all check out this playlist for more death metal rankings by year. I did the entire 90s at this point. I'm trying to chug these out when I can, but they take a lot of effort. So again, consider joining on Patreon or becoming a channel member to support content like this, because it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. This is not my full-time job. and then when I risk things getting demonetized too, it's like, it's not for nothing because I still enjoy it, but yeah. Anyways, that'll do it for now. I will see you in the trenches.